back to Kyle Talks, where I'm Kyle and we talk. I am excited for you guys to listen to this episode, and this is also my first video podcast. So if you're listening on YouTube, thank you, and let me know how the editing and quality and conversation is. If you're listening to on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, welcome back. Today's conversation is important to have. It's one I didn't know about how I felt. So I invited to have a conversation because I wasn't sure how I felt. My guest today is Adam Swart, CEO of Crowds on Demand, which is a company known for organizing paid protest. So if a company wants protesters, large demonstrators, they talk to Adam. This isn't an endorsement. This isn't a takedown. This isn't gotcha. It's a conversation about belief, faith, influence, and money. It's where things start to feel uncomfortable and the ethics and morality of being paid to believe something. If you care about how opinions are shaped and how to have real conversations on hard topics, you're going to enjoy this episode. Please enjoy my conversation with Adam Swart. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome.
Hey, Kyle, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Let's just jump right into it. Can you tell us what you do? I'd love to learn more about it.
Sure. So I'm a founder of a company called Crowds on Demand, which is the nation's largest protest company. What we do is we organize protests, but it's more than protests. We organize advocacy campaigns, PR stunts, anything that involves organizing groups of people to advocate, publicize, expound, evangelize, whatever you want to call it, an event, a cause, a company, and to get it to the next level, to catalyze change, to catalyze sales, whatever the case may be.
How did you? Okay, that's awesome. By the way, I have so much questions and not sure how I feel about that yet. But how do you? Where did the start come from? Like, how are you like? Oh, I can make this a business.
Yeah, so I worked on a lot of campaigns in college, mostly on the Democrat side. I'm definitely an independent now, but one of the things is that the people running those campaigns, this was the early 2010s, they had come of age in the 60s, right? Where you could just put some flyers on the quad and you'd have 5,000 students out there protesting against whatever the issue was of the day. Meanwhile, that was not the case then when I was in college, and it's obviously not the case now either, where organizing is really hard. So yeah, I would remember we were organizing for Democrats, and you'd have people like Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom who would come to campus, and there'd be like 5 people watching them, right? And you might have some great things to say, but ultimately it doesn't do much good if it's 5 people, right? I always like to say, imagine the greatest speeches of all time. Imagine Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech delivered to 5 people. It wouldn't have the same resonance, even though those words are equally beautiful, right? So basically, the so we had this. So I saw there's a need for it, and I also saw what do we have in LA. Now, I went to school at UCLA,
Oh,
and
nice.
what do we have in LA is we have a lot of out of work actors. So these are people who are very theatrical, who can play a role, right? So what if there are people who have trouble getting turnout, and then there are people who are great at fulfilling a role, right, and being cast? So what if you kind of brought those two things together and hired those actors to be audience members, supporters, protesters, whatever? These are people who are already theatrical, already good at kind of following direction, right? So I thought it was a perfect match. Now, we've changed our business model a little bit around activism more recently, where our focus is on getting genuine people. So if you're an actor, that's fine. We don't discriminate on occupation, but you have to be passionate about the cause. But when I started the business, I don't really give a crap whether someone was passionate about the cause. We're just like, hey, we're going to provide people out there, and it doesn't matter. What I was looking for is to giving my clients the lowest possible cost for getting as many people as possible, because that's what clients were looking for.
So, okay. So, if how does that work with individual protest? They say, let's say issue A, they're passionate about, and then you're like,
Yeah.
oh, and issue A comes, and you send them out on issue A, probably
Yes, yeah,
whatever that look
exactly.
like.
That's exactly right. I mean, you have to keep in mind, Kyle, we've been in business for 13 years, so we know a lot of people around the country and we know what they're passionate about. So if let's just say, Minneapolis, there's a campaign to stop the defunding of the police in Minneapolis. Well, we might have a roster of people who are maybe more on the conservative side there who are passionate about. So we'd imagine we'd ask them first, like, hey, what about the police? But maybe we wouldn't just ask conservatives. Maybe we'd ask people we know are small business owners or entrepreneurs who might be passionate about that subject, right? Or let's just say we're doing a cause in Philadelphia and it's about stopping a power plant. Well, maybe we have environmental activists who are passionate about those things and we put them to work there, and we know here's some environmental activists we have in Philadelphia, so let's put them to work on that.
So I assume there's a lot. So it sounds like there's probably a lot of logistics with that. Saying this
Oh, of
person,
course.
having a sheet, Excel, where these people
Yeah.
go, and they. So on, I think that's where a lot of the gray area is. Like,
Okay.
how do you think about this question? So as I was preparing, I'm like, okay, so is there earnest intent? Are people like, hey, I care about this issue, or I'm getting paid 15 an hour or whatever it may be? How
Well,
do you
that was
think
what we
about
paid
that?
when we started. We pay people more now. I mean, the
Okay.
economy has changed, as you can imagine,
Yeah.
Kyle. So we is that in 2012, I like to pay people well. And you know why? Because, first of all, I like to pay people well so that we can get good people who are passionate, but not so well that we get people to change their opinions for us, right? So there's some price at which we can all of our opinions will change. And now, depending on who we are and how much money we have, that may fluctuate, right? So, in the sense of, I could get some ordinary, maybe like someone who's working class, struggling to pay the bills. I could offer them $10,000. They might change their opinion. Maybe if you're a billionaire, you might change your opinion, but it could be more. Then it could be billions of dollars would have to be on the line for you to change your opinion. There's always a price for everything, theoretically at least. But
Yeah.
but we're not paying people in that league. So in the sense of what we pay people is enough to cover the opportunity cost of whatever else they were going to do. So let me explain what that means. So
Okay.
by giving you a historical example, Kyle. So before, I think it was 1911, members of the British Parliament were not paid for their services, right? So who do you think was able to become a member of the British Parliament before getting paid? People who already had money, right? So maybe they were in parliament for ego, or maybe they were in parliament to preserve their existing wealth, right? The existing system. But essentially, if you weren't wealthy, you could never hope to be in the British Parliament because you couldn't afford to work for free. So now take extrapolate that example to protesting, right? So who do you see disproportionately represented as protesters? Well-to-do retirees and college students, right? Why? Because they have no opportunity cost for going, right? They don't have kids to take care of. They don't have a job that would require them to be there, right? Who do you not see at most protests? Janitors, maids, McDonald's fast food workers, right? Those are people who aren't able to, people with kids, right? Why? Because if I'm an hourly worker and I want to attend a protest, I'd have to take an unpaid day off and I would have to pay for childcare, right? So the cost could be a couple $100s to go to a protest. So what our company does is we bridge that gap, right? So we'll pay you that amount of money. You see what I'm saying? So
Hmm.
we'll compensate you for attending. So we'll whatever the opportunity cost would be. So I like to say I we compensate people generously enough so that we get good people, right? Because there are some people or clients who will ask, and I'm not saying we've never done this, but oh, just get homeless people on the street, right? Well, I'm not opposed to paying homeless people if it's an issue that they might legitimately be passionate about, but I'm not going to compensate people who have no idea, no knowledge about an issue, and are not equipped to speak about an issue, because ultimately that's going to reflect poorly on the cause.
So how do you vet that then? So do you just like this? You have someone on your team? hey, how do you
Yeah.
feel about XYZ,
Yeah,
whatever.
I actually do. I do
Okay.
have someone in charge of that, and I have multiple people who handled it for
Okay.
us, right? And by the way, Kyle, I have to say, I always say this
Okay.
costs me money. I don't make money on this, right? So the vetting part, like most of my clients are not
The
really
vetting.
willing to pay to compensate me for what it takes to do that. Because as you can imagine, we have 50. So, well, maybe you can't imagine, but we interview every participant at every event for 15 to 20 minutes, either Zoom call. Ideally, it's via like a Zoom or FaceTime so we can also see them personally, or via just phone call, but we talk to them, each participant. So as you can imagine, that's a time consuming process and expensive, and my clients in many cases are not willing to pay for that, so that comes out of our margin. So me saying I want good people comes out of my margin. So I'm always like upset when people are like, oh, he's like getting people who don't care about the issue, when I'm like, you fuckers, I actually
Yeah.
take this out of my own pocket to do
Yeah.
this. I make more money, and I did make more margin when I didn't give a fuck about who was there. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it
That's
annoys me when people make that false insinuation
yeah.
because it's just not true.
That makes sense. And I want to jump into the money making more, but more about the people. So let's say company A, whatever they be. How if I'm a protester right now, oh,
Yeah.
I want to go to the what does that look like as far as trying to organize the organization bit of it?
Wait. So if you're someone who works for me, or
Correct.
you're just someone who wants to well, okay.
Both, I
So
guess. Yeah.
I can describe it first from the protester standpoint. So
Okay.
okay, you pass this vetting process. Let's just say it's an issue of we're opposing the defund the police movement in
Okay.
Minneapolis. Like the streets are insane. The city is lawless, and maybe I'm a small business owner, and I've seen this impact firsthand, and now I'm being compensated to attend a rally at the city hall to say we want our police back, right?
Yeah.
That's just a hypothetical example. Okay,
Yeah.
so you've been vetted that you're passionate about it. You can prepare talking points. You're told to show up at this time, right? Maybe it's 4 o'clock because the meeting's at 6 o'clock, right? The city council meeting's at 6 o'clock, let's just say,
Okay.
right? So at 4 o'clock, you get signed in, you meet with the team, we all get energized, we talk about why each person is there and what makes them passionate about the subject. We might, at that point, if we haven't done it already, we'll vet who's going to be the spokespeople, like who are going to be the key protesters for the protest, right? So
What
who
do
are
you
going
mean
to
by that? Sorry. Yeah. What do you mean by that? Key protesters.
so like who might be the ones responsible for talking to media, for example.
Okay. Okay.
um like, because for example, in every movement you can be passionate about a movement but either not want to speak to the media or not be equipped to speak to the media, right? Because
Okay. Okay. That makes
speaking to
sense.
media is another thing, because people are always like, oh, well, why don't you make all of your people available to speak to the media? Well, is there any organization in the world that makes every person available to speak to the media? If I go to a butler at the White House, would I be able to ask the butler, well, what do you think of Donald Trump's policy in Venezuela? No, the butler's
Yeah.
not responsible for speaking on that, right? Or his low level policy aides aren't responsible for speaking on that. There are people at the White House who are responsible for speaking on that, right? Similarly, there are protesters whose job it is to chant, and there are protesters whose job it is to speak to the media. So we tend to choose people who have more kind of interesting stories, personal experience, are articulate, and who are good under pressure. To have those roles, we might pick really loud people to speak to be the chant leaders, right? So in the pre-meeting, which typically happens like a couple hours before the protest, we will pick those roles. We'll get people amped. We'll distribute signs, or if maybe we'll have the people make their own signs on site depending on what the client wants. um and then once we get out onto the streets, we'll be out there. We'll always, at the pre-meeting, we remind people we are a law-abiding company, right? Our job is to protest peacefully, respectfully, lawfully, right? We
On
know our
that,
rights.
on that, sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt. So on that, let's think. I'm thinking of. Sorry, I have so many thoughts. So let's say recently, I'm from LA. I'm in LA. The LA
Yeah.
protests happened a few months ago. The car
o-
blew up, everything like that. So let's just say, for example, I don't know if you were involved with that, if you can share that.
Okay.
But if
Okay.
you, let's say your crowds were there and your crowd did that, for example, I don't know if that's true
Which
or
they
not.
wouldn't.
They wouldn't. I'm just saying, for in this example, that's your people doing that. How does that reflect on you? Because that's a business at the end of the day. And
Well, yeah. So it wouldn't. The answer is that we've been in business 13 years, and I
yeah,
don't believe anyone has ever done anything illegal on the job, right?
okay,
And because part of what the type of people that we recruit are people who are passionate about the issue, but also ultimately are more likely to have familial connections. They don't want to get arrested, and I don't want people to get arrested. So my job, here's the thing, part of why I recommend people hire me is that we're good at being persuasive. You can be persuasive without breaking the law. You see what I'm saying?
I agree
Like
with that.
we,
Yeah, I agree.
we live in a free country, right? There is no reason to block off a road without a permit, vandalize, create violence when we have the right in this great country to speak our mind peacefully. You see
I
what I'm
agree. Yeah,
saying?
I agree with that 1,000%. 1,000%. When we're talking about weeding out the bad actors and people are paid to be there, as far as now, this may be a little ignorant. Is this like a 1099 independent contractor? Do you provide healthcare? Because imagine someone gets hurt. Hey, I gotta
Well,
talk to
again,
Adam.
we're very good at so look, the reality is it has to be contractors. And you know why,
Yeah,
Kyle? Is because people are free to accept or decline work. So let's just say people were employed, you would thus be compelled to, like, if I work at Starbucks, I have to serve somebody if they're a white supremacist, black supremacist, Asian supremacist. It doesn't matter who they are. I have to serve them. It does,
yeah,
BLM,
yeah.
Nazi, like it doesn't matter. If you're a Starbucks employee, you got to serve whoever it is because Starbucks says you serve whoever it is, right?
Yeah.
So because they're employees, we can't possibly run our business that way because we want people to be free to accept or decline jobs that don't comport with their values.
That makes sense. And then, but liability, how where I mean, 1099, I may be ignorant, so forgive me if my ignorance is showing. But they're on their own essentially. If something were to happen, well, they're on the job. I mean, it's a protest, but they're on the job essentially.
Well, look, one of the things I'm very, very happy to tell you is that in 13 years in business, we've never had someone be hurt.
That's good. That's good.
Again, I like to say I'm really judicious about the stuff that we take on. Like, experience helps.
Yeah,
So I know the kind of things that will go well. I know the kind of things that are going to be shit shows. And I generally can see a shit show from a mile away. So sometimes I've gone in the news with what I've even rejected because I'm like, this is going to be a shit show. So people
yeah,
reach out to us regarding almost every cause imaginable, as you can imagine, right? And there are certain types of things where even if I might agree with the cause, I'm like, you're gonna put protesters in a lot of danger here, or where let's just say you have peaceful protesters from us, but then there might be other violent agitators nearby, and that puts my protesters at risk from the violent agitators, but also from law enforcement who might have trouble distinguishing who's peaceful and who's not. So I like to say I'm very judicious about trying to figure out what to take on and what not to take on.
I see what you're saying. As far as like, what's the risk, and is the risk worth
Yeah,
having our people? Oh, okay,
that's right.
I follow you on that one. I mean,
Yeah.
speaking of you talking to other companies, you're. I was doing my research a little bit. You reached out to Congress. I read your letter that you wrote out to them
Yes.
to stand. Can you tell us more about your interaction with the law?
Well, here's my interaction is that first of all, we've had amazing interactions with law enforcement. I like to say that law enforcement are our partners because they work for us, right? You have to keep in mind that in the law enforcement in a free country exists to actually facilitate the expression of rights, not to hamper.
Yeah,
So this isn't an authoritarian country. So I think of police as our friends because what you may have is, let's just say we're doing a protest and maybe the person we're protesting is very unhappy about what we're doing. The cops are actually there to protect our right to free expression. Do you see what I'm saying? So the cops are there to actually protect First Amendment rights. They're not there. So a lot of protesters think of cops as an enemy because they're like, oh, cops are telling us not to do this. No, primarily cops are there for your safety. We always work well with cops. Now, that's not to say that I haven't had interactions where I've had to firmly let members of law enforcement know that we have the right to be here and to escalate it to senior law enforcement to make sure that the line cops know what, you know, that we're allowed to be there, right? So we've
Yeah.
had, for example, we've had protests outside convention centers where they're like, "Oh, can you move across the street?" And our answer is often respectfully,
We can be
no.
here. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
respectfully,
I've
no.
seen those videos. Those upset. What doesn't matter the issue. People have a right to be there and peacefully protest. And I think I'm connecting the dots. That's where it come in. If you say, "Hey, we take this. This is not a risk, or this is a risk. It might have law enforcement potentials, etc." And stepping back from that. When you're looking at what protests to take as a business owner.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so let me also comment on the letter because I'm so glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Um, because what I was getting to this is that we've had great interactions with law enforcement, but one of the challenges is I do feel that broadly that the law enforcement response to protests often depends on who is protesting and who is in control. And that is a very bad thing in a free country because it shouldn't matter whether the protesters should be judged on their actions, not on their content. So if you vandalize a building, you should be held accountable for the vandalism, right? It doesn't matter if it's BLM, Proud Boys, neo-Nazi, Palestine, whatever. If you
Yeah.
vandalize, you need to be held accountable.
Agreed.
But the reality is that there are some instances that I have seen where left-wing law enforcement, for example, has gone too easy on left-wing protesters. So example is BLM. There are people who went and stormed the police stations. They literally stormed the police stations. They blocked bridges. They put a lot of people in danger with what they did, and they were barely held accountable at all.
I mean,
Right?
I was in
Convince,
LA when the 2020 George Floyd riots were happening. I mean,
yeah.
even as a mixed individual, my father is African American. Like seeing that, that's not okay. Like what
That's
happened
also, it
wasn't
doesn't
okay.
matter what the cause is. But here's the
Yes,
thing:
yes,
that
I
it
agree.
doesn't matter what the cause is. You have
Yes,
the right to protest. Like so. So the Supreme Court has affirmed the idea you have the right to protest no matter what the cause. So it doesn't matter that let's just say we 100% agree with the BLM cause, which I don't. But let's just say I 100% agree. It doesn't matter if you're vandalizing, you're vandalizing, right?
agreed.
If you're violent, you're violent. You're burning buildings, you're burning buildings. And the law should not distinguish whether they agree with the cause or not. You know, and by the way, if a cause is peaceful, they have the right to assemble, even if you hate the cause, and even if they're objectively reprehensible. Right?
Yep.
There's a case called Skokie versus Illinois, which affirmed the right of literal Nazis, not neo Nazis, Nazis, to march peacefully through a Jewish neighborhood composed primarily of Holocaust survivors. So if basically the most reprehensible form of speech is allowed, then all form of speech should be allowed, right?
Yep.
Um, but the challenge is, so okay, so left wing went very very easy on them, but then I think in some cases they went way too hard on the January 6th people. Conversely, right wing law enforcement I think went way too harsh. In Georgia, there were protesters who protested Cop City, which is a
Yeah.
police training facility. And there were, to be sure, there were people who were violent that need to be held accountable. But my understanding is there were people who were not violent who were charged under domestic terrorism, right? I mean, that's
Yep.
absurd, right? That's absurd. By the Republican Attorney General. So this, to me, all of it is unacceptable. You need to be held accountable for your actions. And what I've been pushing for Congress to do is adopt a set of protesters' rights and responsibilities and authorities' rights and responsibilities also to adopt the idea of some degree of transparency where any rally over 500 people should disclose their vendors and their sponsors, right? Even a couple levels up from their sponsors, so that we can understand who is responsible.
What do you mean disclose vendors? Like if you would have to, let's say Crowds on Bands, for example,
That's
you would
correct.
have
That's
to disclose.
absolutely correct.
Okay.
And we should because we would be a vendor potentially in this arrangement,
I
or
see
in
what you're
some
saying.
cases we'll be an organizer. So yes. So but if you'll notice that in the letter, it's a broad thing. So a lot of times people single out what we do as like paid protesting, but there's a lot of forms of incentivized activism. Labor unions, for example, incentivize their people to go. They have a carrot, you get a good shift. Stick, you get a bad shift. I know a lot of labor union members who are told to go to Democratic Party events, even though they're apolitical or Republicans, right? And they're kind of forced to go to Democrat events, right? Similarly, there are Capitol Hill staffers, 15,000 of them, Republicans and Democrats, right? Like when you see Ted Cruz or Ocasio Cortez at a press conference, a lot of the people behind them are people who work for them, right? When it makes it look like they're people who are like citizens, right? In addition, you have people who might be government workers who are going out to a protest, right? So all of these are ulterior motives. I agree that being compensated can be one form of ulterior motive, but there are all kinds of other forms. And I think people should, if I have to disclose it, everyone should disclose it. And that's my goal.
Yeah, I would agree. And with what you're saying, I actually agree. I think that should be visible. What's not visible, though, is what you're talking about. Depending on the area you're in, where it aligns politically, you can
Yeah.
press the thumb. You can press your thumb down. Well, if you're a Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. Depending on your city, depending on the local politics, you can press your thumb down on some things. What do I mean by
Yeah.
that? So if we look at, for example, I'm thinking of like there's predator catcher videos out there where they catch predators, but some states, some cities won't prosecute. We'll say
Yeah.
we'll use LA because I'm in LA. When the
You're talking
riots
about
were
the
going on.
vigilantism, basically, like
Yes,
a
yes,
right, right.
yes.
Well, because I think some of them, the part of it is there's a good faith and the bad faith, right? The good faith of that is the idea of it's called fruit of the poisonous tree, right? So the way that the evidence is gathered may be good for clicks, but it's actually not acceptable evidence gathering because you're putting somebody on camera with one party consent in a two party consent state,
Yeah,
right? So some of that is not permissible evidence in court. You see what I'm saying?
yeah.
Or some of the stings that they do are not permissible. So part of it, the good faith is that actually, whereas these are noble efforts, the evidence that is collected is actually not permissible in court, and therefore it is insufficient to essentially go after them. So that's frustrating. Part of them, and but the sort of maybe the bad faith is I think in some cases they're trying to punish vigilantism because they are worried that, and it's kind of interesting because in a way I respect the idea that you don't want to have too much vigilantism because you could literally have gunfights in the street with people who are not trained law enforcement officials,
Yeah.
right?
Well, my point, not to get caught up in vigilantism, but the point
Yeah,
is, if I it would this is really what I want to get at. If you have the
yeah,
money, you can push something, regardless
yes,
of what it is. So with your
100%.
business, exactly. I know you vet, and that's good. But if I have enough money, I can push an opinion, regardless.
Yeah. Is that a new concept?
No, it's not. It's not new at all. But I think that presents a gray area. And what I was trying to say with like certain counties prosecuting, not in LA, maybe buildings were getting burned down. I think maybe two people were arrested, and there's so much.
Yeah,
It's
that's
it's
bullshit.
the social. I agree. I very much agree. Regardless of the cause, I agree. But the point is, I have social power. I have money. I can make sure this is cool. Where it may not be cool, but since I have the money, I have the pressure, of society, things like that, I can press my thumb, and I'm
Yes.
connecting it to if you do. I know you vet, but if I have the money, let's say defund police. We'll keep going with that, and I really want to defund the police in this example, I can just pay you to do that regardless. Someone's going to be bought eventually.
Well, someone will do it even if I won't do it. I mean, so
Hmm.
but you know, what you're saying is really not directly linked to my business. You're saying money in America can help you run a campaign, but you can't. So here's where I slightly disagree with you because I
Okay.
understand what you're
Okay.
saying.
Okay.
Look, money can buy visibility,
Yep.
but money cannot buy policy. There are a lot of policies that have been tried to be pushed on people that are not popular that money cannot buy, right? So and there are a lot of candidates too. So look at Michael Bloomberg, look at Jeb Bush, right? Look at Kamala Harris, right? These are people who came in with like oodles and oodles of money, but all that money could not make a unlikable person likable. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, so ultimately, money will help you be will help you get name recognition, right? And there are a lot of causes that have never seen the light of day because they haven't had the money. But ultimately, you need public support. It's like you can make the bird fly. You can push the bird off the roof, but the bird has to have wings, right? You can give them a very high roof to jump off of so that you can give them some time to get their bearings, but ultimately they have to have wings. And a cause ultimately has to have wings. And I can tell you, I have worked with a lot of causes, and there are causes where it's just like you can't, you know, the saying, you can't make fetch happen. Don't stop trying to make fetch happen,
Yeah,
right?
I know what you're
Like
saying.
some causes, some candidates, you can push, you can put a lot of money behind them, but ultimately they're not going to stick, because it'll never catalyze. You know what I mean? Like you've heard the term catalyst, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, there has to be something to catalyze.
I think I think I'm going to respectfully disagree with you on that because money
Okay,
can
but
buy
what's an
things, right?
example? Pardon me?
So no, just continuing. This is not reflective of your business.
Yeah, no, I
But
get it.
when we think of this example, at least, when you think of this is out there, but it proves my point. Israel putting tons of money in politicians, and somehow they get it. That's a separate from your business. How I connect that is if I'm a business, for example, I used to work for a government agency. And there was things going on with the elderly that they were cutting programs. The current administration, they did it.
Yeah,
And our my previous employer was looking for like lobbyists, crowds. You may actually have worked with them. But the point is, this is a good issue because people were getting help. At least I would define it as good. But the thing is, we're paying someone. We're paying you to say, hey, put 500 people here. Say, we want our elderly to be taken care of, which again, I think is noble. But again,
yeah.
I'm pushing my thumb down on something because I have
But I
that
get
influence of
what's in college
finances.
that every movement in history, whether you agree with it or not, has been that you've heard of has been backed by a ton of money. Gay
Yeah,
rights, civil rights, MAGA, Tea Party, right?
right.
Whether you agree or disagree with those movements, those are movements that had a ton of public support, but were catalyzed through a lot of money, right? That's just the reality. So it's
Yeah,
if what you're saying is money helps, yes. But if you were trying to say we we want to fund the destruction of elder care facilities, we hate the elderly, right? You
sure.
can put a lot of money in there, but it ultimately wouldn't work. Now, you mentioned the example of Israel. So, like, I just want to analyze that from just a purely
Please,
objective,
please.
non-ideological manner. So you're talking about the power of the Israel lobby in the United States,
Correct.
right? And there is that power, but it doesn't solely come from money, right? It comes from you have two major constituencies that support Israel in the United States, right? Maybe three. Well, you've had the Jewish community, right? Both the kind of liberal and conservative Jewish community and moderate. And two, you've had Christian Zionist communities, right? So Christians who are evangelical, who believe in the power of Israel. And then I guess there's a third constituency, which is sort of the neoconservative constituency, who kind of supports Israel as sort of, they view it as some a strategic partner, right? Now that's not a huge group in term that's a moneyed interest, but it's not a huge group in terms of public support. Now historically, support has come a lot from the Jewish community and from more people on the left, right? Because Israel was sort of seen as a, hey, Israel's the underdog,
You're
right?
saying support
Now,
for Israel is what you're saying, right? I just want to make
yeah,
sure.
public
Okay,
support, and
okay,
I'm not
okay. Oh,
talking
yeah,
about
yeah,
financial support.
yeah. Okay,
I'm talking about public support for
got it.
Israel has come from that, right? So it's not solely, oh, this is an unpopular cause that has money, so gotten it's been favorable. There are people for whom, whether it's religious reasons or political reasons, Israel is a very important issue. And if you're a candidate who comes out and says, oh, I don't like what Israel is doing, you will not only be funded, that your opponents will be funded, but there are people who would oppose you. Do you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
so it's not, what I'm saying is that to to view that the Israel movement is just about money is neglecting the fact that there's also a lot of support behind Israel in the United States.
I see what I see what you're saying. You're communicating, and I want to make sure we're on the same page.
And it's the
Communicating
same thing with
money
any other
can't.
law.
Yeah, you can have all the money in
Money,
the world, but if no backing, it doesn't go
I mean,
anywhere.
it's the same thing with the NRA, right? Where people
Sure.
say, oh, well, it's money, right? Well, no, because the anti gun lobby has plenty of money too. Michael Bloomberg, right?
Yeah.
Funded, and a lot of other very wealthy people. I don't know whether it's as much money or more money in the NRA, but it's not about money. It's that there's a huge group of Americans that are very passionate about their guns. And again, I'm just talking about this purely practical. I'm not taking an ideological stand on these, but I'm saying that ultimately these are movements that are viewed as moneyed interests because there is a lot of money, but in addition to the money, there's a lot of legitimate public support. And what the money does is it helps catalyze that support. Because what the money does is it helps, okay, we can send a mailer to everybody saying this candidate is anti gun, this candidate is anti Israel, right? But ultimately, for that to work, there has to be people who actually care about those things. Do you
Okay.
understand what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
No. I have a lot of. So my next. Okay. So if you need support, money, I think we've talked about that where that lands. How do you change? What's the goal of your protest then? And based on that answer, I have a follow up. The goal of someone coming across to you and saying, "Hey, Adam, I want to use your crowds on demand platform. I want to get these crowds for defunding the police. We'll run with that." What's
Yeah, okay.
your goal? Yes, you make money. Now, more questions to that, but what's the goal? Like just to support whatever this company is interested in, or do you have? Is there other motives going into
Okay,
it?
well, I love talking about this. So let me outline the three
Okay.
major goals that I have for this year.
Okay.
But generally, not, I mean, these are three policy priorities that I have that I want to work on. Number one is taking on the social media monopolies. Um, because I think social media is a cancer on this society. It's destroying people's brains. It's destroying families.
Agreed on
It is
that. Yeah.
engineered to be
Yeah.
addictive. It's just a nasty, nasty thing. It's caused genocide. It's caused Trump attachment syndrome, Trump derangement syndrome, everything in between. And so much else even beyond our borders. Number two, processed food, fast food, Coca Cola, all that stuff. It's also poisoning people's bodies, right? So
Agreed.
social media poisons our brain. Um, Fast food poisons our body, right? And Coca Cola,
And you're
and
saying
it's
you
also
would want to. Sorry to
take on
interrupt.
those,
You'd
take
want
them
to
on.
participate. Okay, you want to take them on. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's killed more black people than the Ku Klux Klan. Fast food
Fast food.
and Coca Cola, right? And you notice these McDonald's ads. It's like I feel like every time I see it, there's always a black person in there because they're really trying to hit black communities with this, and it's responsible for diabetes, heart disease, um, cancer, basically everything under the sun, right? High blood pressure, all this stuff, and it's marketed disproportionately to Black Americans and to poor Americans, right? So it's just messed up. Number three are cities, right? Our cities are not doing well. We need more parks. We need more public transit. We need more police. We need to be our cities should be amazing, and yet they are struggling due to lack of good governance. So those are the three issues that I want to take on. Now, I would take on plenty of campaigns that don't align with those three. But if you're saying what Adam Swart are you passionate about, that's what I'm passionate about.
I agree actually, especially with the first all three of them actually hard agree on every single point. Where do you get this now? Is this your personal feeling, the company's feelings? Where does that land? And does
Yeah,
that mean
it's
you'd be
Adam's
able to
feeling.
push that? Okay. I'm not
It's
saying that's
Adam's feeling.
wrong. And I would actually agree. But where does that come in? It's your business. You're a business. You know what I mean? Like people
Well, it
trying to,
means that I
yeah.
would that I it means that I look to take those things on. It means that I probably wouldn't take anything on that's contrary to those things.
I
Do you see what
see.
I'm saying?
I
So
see.
so it means that obviously we'll work on a ton of causes that don't involve those three things because it's we're a business as well, right? But I probably wouldn't take on business pushing defund the police, pushing fast food, or pushing like a damaging content out there. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, we're all humans. We have ideas, regard business owner, employee. We all have ideas of what we religious or not. Is there a now? That's what I believe. You have your decisions. People are free in this country, which I'm grateful for. Can there be an argument made though with that, with what we just discussed, of a conflict of interest between your business and real issues?
Well, why don't you describe why that would be a conflict of interest?
Oh, great thing. I'm so grateful you put that. So for example, I think this as good, but not taking on defund the police. I'm taking on the most controversial one. And you
Okay,
say, "Hey, I know, sorry to do that to you," but you're saying, "Hey," and I agree. I personally don't want to see the police go away personally. But when
yeah,
you're looking at the lens of a business owner, you have the freedom to choose who and who you don't do business with. I
that's correct.
believe in that 1,000%. But social politics is also play, as we've discussed. Do you care about any of those pressures? Maybe people of your protesters say, "Hey, we should take on more of this," and you personally, you're like, "I don't like that." Is that the conflict of interest there? Is that making sense?
Well, it's not a conflict of interest because if people want to take on those issues, there will always be people who, I mean, well, for the first two, there's oodles of money behind fast food and oodles of money
True.
behind social media monopolies. So
True.
if you want to get paid by those people, there's ample opportunities to do that. I mean, those two interests own all of Congress practically. So,
Yeah.
so those interests are very well represented. You asked about defund the police. That's complicated. I mean, initially the defund the police movement through BLM was backed by a bunch of billionaires. I think a lot of them have soured on it now, seeing the impact it's had on our cities.
Yeah.
So, but people are free to support those causes. It's not for me to tell people what not to work on, but I don't want to work on it in my business. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. And you have
So,
that
so
right and
people are
freedom
free
to
to,
do that.
I have the right to not take
Correct.
those that
Correct.
on. No,
Correct.
no. To be clear, I would gladly take on a campaign holding individual police departments accountable for misconduct. So don't get my opposition to defund the police as a sign that I support that I will gloss over police misconduct. If the police are not responsible or if they're being racist or whatever, and there's proof, I would 100% take a campaign saying we've got to have accountability because I actually think an
Yes.
accountable police department is actually a better police department.
And
So
there's so
so
much
I think
gray area in that. We've seen
yeah,
so many for what you just said. I love what you just said, Adam. Um, you don't don't see what don't hear what I'm not saying. I don't support defund the police. That doesn't mean like, oh, a minority's getting beaten. Next, like just go straight over it. And I think
Yeah,
that's a lot of the
if
gray
a
area
minority,
lost.
if we were invited to take up a case of somebody unjustly brutalized by the police, I would gladly take that on.
Yeah.
But my the only difference is my ask would not be defund the police. It would be to hold those officers accountable for what was done, and if there is systemic change that's needed, to figure out what is the systemic change that would be needed that would actually make life better for everybody.
Yeah. I
So
can't disagree on that.
believe me, I'm not a like so I'm a very nuanced person in my outlook on things. So I'm not a shill for anybody. I'm a political independent. So I don't need to like you know to to shill for anybody.
I agree. And this is going to be a bit of a nerdy take, but I want to follow up being
Okay,
like
fine.
individually. I don't know if you read, there's a new Batman comics out or whatever. And so nerdy. And if you, for those of you who know what I'm talking about, props to you. But there's a character who makes money by playing both sides in the comics politically. Now let's extrapolate this to a real world example, like with you. Does
We would not do that.
You're playing both
No,
sides though, essentially with your business, correct? Or am I misunderstanding?
politically, but no, but that's so here's why that's not exactly the case.
Okay.
We would not place the same sides of the same issue. So let's just say Amazon wanted to launch an anti-labor campaign again, and the union wanted to launch a campaign against Amazon. We would never take on both sides of that.
I see.
Now, in what that doesn't mean is we might work a case for a labor union in one place, and we might work a case against another labor union in another place if it's common sense, because I'm nuanced. So labor isn't always right, management isn't always right. Do you see what I'm saying?
Definitely. I
So
follow you on that. Yeah.
so it's not a conflict of interest, because a conflict of interest implies that there's two teams and everything has to be put into those two teams. I can run a campaign for one that seems more on the conservative end in one place on one issue. Let's just say, like as I've mentioned, I oppose defund the police. Whereas I might run a campaign to protect people's healthcare rights, which is generally associated with a liberal bent,
Sure. I
on
see.
another. I'm not a Republican operative or a Democratic operative. So I don't have to work for, I don't owe them my loyalty. Now I owe a cause my loyalty. So in the sense of, if I was hired by a labor union to protest Amazon, I couldn't then take money from Amazon to attack that same labor union.
On the same
Oh,
issue, you're saying from both sides.
correct. Yeah, obviously not.
Could there and I know you've gotten this question a lot. Could people hear what you just said and say, that's great, but he works I mean, I've looked at your work. You state you work with both sides politically,
Yes.
right wing and left wing. Could people hear what you just said and say, that doesn't matter because they themselves say, Adam has said we work with both sides? Is that not putting two hands in
Well,
one cookie jar?
no, because that's a simplistic way of looking at it. Because both sides means, because that means that there's a side in each thing. There's a side in, it means that I'm nuanced, right? And
Yeah.
that's like saying I'm a lawyer and I work for an insurance company here and I work for a plaintiff there, right? That's not both sides. That's saying I'm working with one theoretical side here and one theoretical side there. So it means that I'm a common sense person. And it means that I recognize that Republicans are right sometimes, Democrats are right sometimes.
Do you see that? I would agree, by the way, especially on that last part.
Yeah.
Do you see that with your? Let me gather my thoughts here. With the people that you hire, with the work that you do, both as an individual and as a business owner,
Yeah.
you see people just, they'll keep running with politics. I'm red, blue, no matter who or whatever, and that being able to influence politics, companies buy into that. What do you think of that, both as a person, as a business owner? Is that part of the vetting progress? Oh, you look at their history. What does that look like?
Uh, so the question is, um, whether I would look at someone's history or they would look at my history.
Both, both.
Well, people are free to look at our history, and decide. I mean, if you're, for example, someone who, and I'm sure people have made that determination to not work with us because maybe I'm a Republican or a Democrat and I want someone who is known as a Republican operative, right? And who's a far right winger, right? And I'm not that, or vice versa. But I've here's one thing that I'm good at is I know how the right thinks and I know how the left thinks. And so I've been hired by the I know how they think, so people will hire me because I know how to operate, use the best strategies of both sides.
For like financial compensation, exactly what you're saying. Like if the right came up to you, I know how to market this essentially.
Yeah, exactly. I know the smart things conservatives have done, and I know the smart things that the left has done.
Does that play into the blue no matter who mindset though? If you
Well,
use the same play cards for your business, does that just
I use
reassure
Republican and Democrat
both
playbooks.
sides? Yeah, I'm saying both sides. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I was just using
Yeah,
you
I
as an
use
example.
both playbooks in my business because they both do a lot of things intelligently and they both have blind spots.
Could you extrapolate that a little bit
Well, there's certain smart things that the left does, and there's certain smart things that the right does. Right, like the right is already adopting left wing playbooks through cancel culture right now. Right, so the left invented this beautiful, like nasty cancel culture, right, and where they basically are kind of like, okay, we found that you do something wrong, so we're going to come after everyone who supports you and to put pressure on you, right?
more? Yeah.
So the conservatives have started to do that on their side, like they call it the woke right. So there's a lot to learn from both sides, and certainly I've learned a lot from both sides. But a lot of times what we take on is the side of common sense. So there's no I just want to be very clear, there's no conflict of taking on certain conservative causes and certain liberal causes, as long as it's not two sides of the same issue.
Yeah, as we discussed, what you were saying, yeah, I agree. Is there anything that, so with that in mind, is it you decide? Is there a team that you're like, hey, I want to take issue A? Do you go to a,
Yeah.
maybe you can't reveal that or you can share what you can, but it's like, hey, is there some checks and balances or is it Adam, we're going to do this? Sorry. Or is there like, hey,
Well,
I would like to do
I
this?
generally run. I well, first of all, I like my team to be on board with what we're doing.
Mm,
So, if there's something that is questionable, um, then I run it by my team. And I'll give you an example.
okay.
Is there were about a year and a half ago, we started getting approached by a ton of Israel and Palestine related causes. And we're given a lot of lucrative offers, and none of them were nuanced. It was all just like, let's scream at the other guy, right? So I went to my team members, and I have people who are on the Israel team, and I know of people who are on the Palestine. And we were kind of talked it over, kind of had a very boisterous discussion about it. And we are like, this is just a shit show. We're not gonna let's just say no to everything.
Does money ever play an influence in that? Because you have to make money, right? You have to pay your
Yeah,
people,
well,
yourself. What does that look like?
we're lucky that we've been in business 13 years, so we
Yeah.
do have a lot of people who approach us, right? Um, and that I don't worship the almighty dollar either. So there are a lot of decisions, such as vetting people more effectively, such as saying no to certain causes, that probably cost me money. If you're asking, could I make more money if I did things a different way? Yeah, I could. I'm not in it. I don't worship the almighty dollar.
Okay. Even yeah, that makes sense. So I could
I mean,
just
I'm
see.
obviously not. I'm trying to make money, but
Well,
I'm
yeah, of
not.
course.
I don't
Yeah,
worship the almighty dollar.
yeah, of course. There's I can just see, and you've gotten this people saying, "Oh, the interest is now influenced by the dollar, regardless of the issues. I'm
Well,
sure
that's
you've
true.
heard that, but we've talked about how you think
Well,
about
have
that,
you
or
been to? So the people who say that, I'm like, you understand that this is the United States of America. We are a capitalist
yeah,
country. So
sure,
I don't know who's saying, oh my God, you can buy things in America, and sometimes like people with money get their way more often than people without money. Like, I'm shocked.
yeah, that's a good.
Is
I
that
think that
shocking?
should surprise no
Like,
one.
are these people like daft? I mean, like,
Yeah, that's
I'm
just
not sure when it's ever been so. But I guess my question to the people who are outraged by it, and like, and I don't disagree with people being saying, oh well, it sucks that moneyed interests tend to get their way more often. But has that ever not been the case in the whole course of American history
yeah,
or world history? That
yeah.
moneyed interests ever not had an advantage over non-moneyed interests?
I would agree. I think money has always been. Yeah,
All
you
I
do.
would
Yeah,
say, Kyle, is that we often are hired more crowds on demand by the Davids versus the Goliaths. Because if you're the Goliath, you don't always need us. Because you can buy off all of Congress. You know what I mean?
yeah.
You can write your own laws. You can pay off all the lobbyists, pay off everybody, right? Whereas for us, whereas protest is an inherently oppositional strategy. So we tend to be used by startups or medium-sized companies against big companies. We tend to be used by smaller interests against bigger interests. So that's all I'll say is that certainly you have to have money to be able to afford our services, but I will say that the real money, the real Goliath interests have just more or less bought off the system entirely.
That's a great note. I know we're getting closer to time here,
Yeah.
Adam, and I'll be respectful of that. So, I two last questions as we wrap up. Um, I'm just so curious. What does the future look like professionally, society for you? I mean, you've been doing it for 13 years. Do you plan to do another 13, 25, 50? What does your end goals look like as a career?
Being able to work on the three causes that I mentioned before,
Mm,
and being able to dedicate my entire like focus to efforts, well-funded efforts within those causes. I want to take on fewer clients that are well-funded and passionate, and that is, um we take on like sometimes hundreds of clients in a year, right?
yeah,
And that's a lot, right? And I would rather focus on like two or three campaigns per year, where even two maybe per year, where they're just focused on real big world impact.
got it. And then my last question, what we do on all of our interviews, we do your thoughts on. So it starts with the chain, your thoughts, your thoughts. And Doug is the last person I talked to. And he said, I would love your thoughts on changing people. How do you change minds, actions, etc.? What do you think about
My thoughts on how to change. Well,
that?
you
Yes.
have to come with, first of all, start with respect. Start with respect rather than judgment. So it's funny. So in my field, I always say I'm in the business of persuasion, right? So what I want to do with our protests is to come in, and if you're dealing with people who might be on the other side of an issue, people who might not know anything about an issue, or might not even know the issue exists, right? And what you want to do is persuade them. So you have to come at them from a perspective of respect, first of all. So you don't call people pejoratives, right? So if you start like saying, calling somebody a racist, well, you're really not going to get them on board, right? Like if I
Yep.
start by saying, if my point is, I want more programs for minorities, right? And I start by being like, white man, you're a racist piece of shit. Well, I'm already like, fuck you, right?
Yeah.
So that's
Agreed.
not going to work, right? So it starts with a respect, and respecting the person's good intentions, right? After the tragic death of the great Rob Reiner, I was watching some old episodes of All in the Family. Have you heard of the show with Archie Bunker, right? Who's
Yeah. Yeah.
just a classic example of this. This is a good man, but he is a bigot, right? He's a bigot, but this is a man who is not, he is not a bad person, right? And he's someone, if you approach him with respect, maybe there's some, can be some persuasion, right? But if you approach a man like that with, you're a bigot, you're just going to reinforce what might be his bigotry. You
All
see what I'm
bets are
saying?
off. Yeah. I'm not going to want to
So
listen to you.
so come in with respect, come in with listening, sometimes just merely asking somebody, hey, why is it that you believe what you believe? Right? And just letting them hear that, and then trying to make the case with their assumptions. So, what is your, sometimes you have to make the case based on someone else's societal assumptions, not my societal assumptions, right? So, let's just say we're talking about defund the police, right? And let's just say my assumption is that, that, you know, we want to have a society that is as safe as possible, right? Um, and someone else's focus is, hey, I want to have a society as just as possible, and I want justice. And what I, why I support defund the police is because there's injustice, and we need to remedy the injustice. Well, then maybe making the case of like, well, here's where defund the police was done, and it actually increased police brutality. It increased crime in the neighborhoods that are most poorly but most unjustly affected, right? So here's how defund the police actually makes society less just. So instead of saying, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, come to them and say, well, you support justice. Is it justice that homicides in black neighborhoods in Chicago have gone up 2-3x since defund the police, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't
Yeah.
sound like justice to me,
Yeah.
right? So to come to someone else with that, right? And come with the facts and figures and an open mind to listen to them. And the last part is to understand that you might not convince someone 100%, but convincing them 25% is still a victory. You see what I'm saying? So I might not convince somebody to 100% agree with me, but if I can convince them to 25% agree with me when it was 0%, that's progress. And part of it is, I always tell people, sometimes it's maybe I won't convince you to vote for me, but I might convince you to not vote for the other guy. And that's
Yeah.
partially a victory.
Yeah.
So take victories where you can get them, and don't always. So one of the things, so I told you what the right can learn from the left is cancel culture and how to implement like a really persuasive advocacy effort, knowing who to call, who has the power, who doesn't. One thing that the left can learn from the right is, the right knows you don't always have to persuade people 100%. Sometimes what all you need to do is convince them not to vote for the other guy.
Yeah, you take your W's where you get them. That's how I say it.
Exactly.
Respect and understanding and listening. I think those are lost arts
Yeah.
today.
So at any rate, those are my thoughts.
Okay, I'm putting you on the spot. Give us the next prompt. Your thoughts on blank for our next guest.
Thoughts on how to bridge the divide between so there are two groups. Okay, so this is a really specific one, but it's a hard question. Okay. So there are two groups in America that have a lot of trouble dating, that I think is part of the political polarization problem. Really educated women and not educated men, right? Educated women are making like good money, and they want to date at the same level or up. Not educated men are maybe not doing so well, and they generally don't want to date up, right? How do you resolve this problem that is I mean, maybe the broader question is, how do you resolve the singleness crisis in America that is contributing to the polarization in America?
Wow, I wasn't expecting that. So that's good. I like that. Thank you so much, Adam. But we're getting to time. Thank you so much. for your
Yes,
time. You were very insightful. I very much enjoyed this conversation. And if someone
I
wants to
did
get
too.
connected with you or connected with your business, is there any place
Yeah,
that's best to do that for them?
www.crowdsondemand.com, or on Twitter at CEO Adam Swart.
Okay. Well, that's it for me, Adam. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you so
Yeah, it
much.
was a pleasure.
Yeah, the
Bye.
pleasure. Take a good rest of your day. Bye.
You too. Bye.